Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui coulent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
James Clapper has been there for all of it. He is a controversial figure in lots of different circles for lots of different reasons, because he's been at least tangentially and in many cases centrally involved in just about every intelligence story that has made the news in the past 40 years. And intelligence issues rarely become national news stories because they're such good news. It's almost always when something's gone bad. But in this new book, James Clapper is scathing about President Trump, which is remarkable itself, coming from a career, nonpartisan military and intel guy who has served under every president since John F. Kennedy. But listen to this. This comes right at the end of the book. The last giant intelligence story and scandal that Clapper was right in the middle of things for was obviously the Russian attack on the 2016 election. You heard me read the part where he explains that's part of why he decided he was going to write a book. The book explains in great detail what the intelligence community knew about the Russian attack, how they responded, what decisions were made while the attack was underway, while President Obama was still president. Again, Clapper left the job of National Intelligence Director on the day of Trump's inauguration. In the intelligence community assessment that Clapper released in January before Trump was inaugurated, you'll remember that the intelligence community announced its conclusion that Russia had attacked the presidential election specifically to try to help Donald Trump win, but the intelligence community didn't try to assess whether or not the Russian attack worked, whether they actually succeeded in giving Trump the win when he otherwise would have lost. That was where the intelligence community's official assessment left off in January of 2017, just as James Clapper was leaving office after decades in intel. Well, now that he is out of government service and a private citizen, James Clapper is ready to say what he really thinks on that front and what he really saw happen. Okay, check this out. By May 2017, when James Comey was fired as FBI director, we had learned that the Russian operation had been even more expansive than the intelligence community had assessed in January. We knew now that the Russians had thousands of Twitter accounts and tens of thousands of bots that posted more than 1 million tweets. They posted more than 1,000 videos on YouTube with days of streaming content. Facebook has said Russian contact reached 126 million of its American users, which is an astonishing number considering that only 139 million Americans voted. As the leader of the intelligence community, I testified that the IC did not attempt to assess whether the Russian influence campaign impacted the results of the election. As a private citizen, I have no doubt they influenced at least some voters. Looking at the savvy ways the Russians targeted specific voter groups, for instance, buying ads on Facebook promoting Clinton's support of the Black Lives Matter movement, but ensuring those ads ran only on the pages of white conservative voters in swing states. Looking at how they created lies that helped Trump and hurt Clinton and promoted these falsehoods through social media and state-sponsored channels to the point that the traditional U.S. media were unwittingly spreading Russian propaganda. Looking at how they ran a multifaceted campaign and sustained it at a high level from early 2015 until Election Day in 2016, Clapper concludes, of course the Russian effort affected the outcome of the election. Surprising even themselves, they swung the election to a Trump win. To conclude otherwise stretches logic, common sense, and credulity to the breaking point. Less than 80,000 votes in 3 key states swung the election. I have no doubt that more votes than that were influenced by this massive effort by the Russians. The immediate past director of national intelligence, who was director of national intelligence during the Russian attack on the election, says he has no doubt that the Russian attack, in his words, quote, swung the election to a Trump win. That means that the immediate past director of national intelligence believes that Donald Trump is only president because of a successful foreign intelligence operation to make him president. And as to the question of whether or not the president's campaign benefited from that operation just by dumb luck, or whether they were in on it in some way, here's what James Clapper says now in this book that is just out tonight. Quote, as the investigations have advanced, the specter of collusion has dominated the discussion. When I left office on January 20th, 2017, I'd seen no smoking gun evidence that the Russian government and the Trump campaign were in substantive coordination of their efforts. I didn't learn about the June 9, 2016 Trump Tower meeting between Trump's closest advisors and representatives of the Russian government purportedly to discuss dirt on Hillary and sanctions against wealthy Russians. I didn't learn about that until I was firmly retired. But what I did see as DNI is that the Russians and the campaign seemed to employ strikingly parallel messaging in social media posts and public statements, effectively complementing each other to great effect with no attempt to hide it. That combined effort appeared to go well beyond candidate Trump's calling on a foreign power to find 30,000 missing emails belonging to his political opponent, or his praise for WikiLeaks for publishing materials Russian intelligence had stolen. On a routine basis, whenever the campaign published an allegation that hurt Clinton, the Russians would repeat, amplify, and embellish that claim. And when the Russians promulgated a conspiracy theory about her, Trump would repeat it at campaign rallies and on Twitter. Whether secretly coordinated or not, whether there was actual collusion or not, this parallelism constituted a putative team effort by the Russian government and the Trump campaign. He served as director of national intelligence for 6.5 years, including for the duration of the Russian attack on the 2016 election. He says in this new book just out today that the Russian attack did sway the election, that Donald Trump would not be president but for that attack. And he says the Trump campaign helped in the attack. He calls it a putative team effort.
It is Wednesday, the 23rd of May of 2018, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam, and our daily special is Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Oh, yes, boy. Donald Trump's on a tear this morning. He's going after America's law enforcement agencies as being the criminal deep state. He doesn't understand that law enforcement goes after crooks, and he is the crook. Not only that, he might even be the traitor. Yes, indeed. Well, that's been pretty much sucking up the oxygen this morning. Seems to be wanting to gaslight America because his remarks are always filled with lies. And he's got a lot of sycophants helping him out. And I don't mean the Colt 45 electorate. I'm talking about Republicans who hold high office. Is it possible to indict a whole party? I don't know. We should consult the Constitution, but then again, the Constitution doesn't have anything about political parties. In fact, George Washington warned us against having political parties now, didn't he? Yeah. The Republicans and Trump will sit in probably the Oval Office and go over the FBI and DOJ files on his criminal investigation. But no Democrats are invited because Somebody's in collusion with somebody, do you think? Okay, well, Mueller marches on, and I got to tell you, Donnie Two Scoops, you can get rid of Mueller, but there are quite a few cases that have moved to other districts, and like the Southern District of New York, for instance. Those investigations will continue unless, I know, he's got some help inside too. And we better root out those people. I'll tell you about the criminal deep state. Donnie has been embedding them. Has he not? Indeed he has. Can you believe Kirsten Nielsen, she's supposed to be the head of the DHS, has not seen the report from the 17 intelligence agencies that said Russia hacked our election and did it specifically to help Donald Trump win? She had never seen that. Okay. She's awfully pretty, though, so she can get away with it. Like Tomi Lahren had a drink thrown in her face because she's such a mean girl, she deserves it. But Donnie Two Scoops came to her defense this morning. And the saying goes is that she might be Mrs. Trump number 4. Wouldn't that be nice? I wonder who's going to be invited to that wedding. All right, enough of that. Let's look at what we're going to be attending to today, because it's a big day. And there's all sorts of news out there in the world. And I guess I've taken it upon the responsibility and duty to bring it to you, indeed. Well, of course, starting off here in the Bistro Cafe, we had Rachel Maddow going over a passage in James Clapper's new book, Facts and Fears. And, of course, it describes the massive Russia propaganda campaign in support of Donnie Two Scoops. Okay, well, he was there. He saw it. Then on the rest of the menu, civil rights religious leaders, by the way, like Reverend Barber and others, they were arrested at the nation's capital on Monday while demanding restoration of Voting Rights Act. Yeah. We'd like to have the Voting Rights Act back. Sorry, we got to arrest your ass. This isn't America anymore. Not with a C, maybe with a few Ks. Continuing to struggle with the idea of players protesting police brutality, the NFL wants in-game penalties for kneeling during the anthem. You can give a penalty for something that happened before the game started? What? I have a great idea. How about we don't fly military jets over the stadiums, and maybe we just don't have the national anthem, then there won't be any kneeling during it, will there? Huh? Or even better yet, why don't we put a cap on how much and how many the police kill in a year? Why don't we do that? And Michigan scrapped its racist Medicaid work exemption, but it is still happening in other states. Yep, kind of like a train. It just has its own momentum. It's a little hard to stop. Slow it down some. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where the West Wing melts down as Trump staffers become paranoid that spies are working to destroy Donnie Two Scoops. I don't think it's spies. And I got to tell you, I think there are spies in Trump's circle. And they might be speaking Cyrillic, or, speaking Russian. You write and read Cyrillic. But they could. And Trump's subpoena gamble could just open the door to indictments. Come on, Donnie. We dare you. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the rightish of the page, of course, is the chat room link, monitored by Roaring Girl, Kelly Lincoln. So do engage us there. To the leftish from the chat room link at the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com is the the contribute donate buttons. And thank you for your generosity. We are unable to do this without you. And your generosity pays the bills. So thank you so much for that. And you can engage Netroots Radio not only by the chat room link, but you can also follow us on Twitter at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that, and rather deftly, I should add. We are also on Facebook if you like to go through there. Maybe some family member might stumble upon it on your timeline. Okay. We never encourage people to go to Facebook, but it's like every other social media platform. They've got you. They got you good. All right. Follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. And I do post the show notes and links on my Daily Co's diary about 10 minutes before showtime. And you can find me on Daily Co's as Justice Putnam's. Oh, and I should add as well, podcasts of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy can be had by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iTunes, etc., etc., etc. Also, if you happen to miss the morning show, it is reprised in the afternoon. Well, afternoon on the West Coast at 5 p.m. It would be in the evening on the East Coast, and that would be 8 p.m. So if you missed the morning show, you can pick it up later on in the afternoon, early evening. And then there's always the pods, too, anytime you want. Okay, let's take a look at this first article here. Oh, let me add real quick about Trump's unsecured phones. And they're still talking about Hillary's emails, which begs the question, if Russia can't get Hillary's 30,000 emails, she must have had a damn good lockdown server then, didn't she? Couldn't be hacked. But Trump's can't be inconvenienced with these trifling matters of security over the phone. I don't know. I don't get it. Okay, Kira Lerner penned this first piece about the 6-week revival of the Poor People's Campaign. Of course, the Poor People's Campaign is what was going on when Martin Luther King got murdered, assassinated. And one of the reasons he was giving the speech to the trash haulers was because that was all part of a Poor People's Campaign in which it originated back in the day. Yes. Okay, so Reverends Jesse Jackson, William Barber, and other prominent religious leaders were arrested for demonstrating in the U.S. Capitol, demanding the restoration of the Voting Rights Act and the end of racial gerrymandering. Well, that'll get you arrested. I think what's happened is that maybe they say that you can't protest in certain areas, so you touch the fence, you can't do that. Dozens of others were also arrested across the country as part of the second week of protests organized by the revival of the Poor People's Campaign. Oh, it's not because you were protesting, like on Capitol grounds, but that you were protesting. Like I said, this isn't America with a C anymore, maybe a few Ks. Let's see, that was a movement, of course, that originated in 1968 with Martin Luther King Jr. at the helm. The campaign, a coalition of progressives and faith-based organizations, plans to hold demonstrations and risk arrest every Monday for 6 weeks. At a rally ahead of the demonstration in the Capitol Rotunda, Barber drew a connection between systemic racism and policies that suppress voters of color. He said that America's democracy was under attack long before the 2016 election by racist voter suppression and gerrymandering, which are tools of white supremacy designed to perpetuate systemic racism, he said. These laws target people of color but hurt Americans of all races by allowing politicians to get elected who block living wages, deny union rights, roll back Medicaid, attack immigrants, and underfund public education. And I might also add, lying about meeting with the Russians to destroy America. Throughout the 6 weeks, Barber and other organizers hope to draw attention to the policies and laws that keep 140 million Americans trapped in poverty. Look, in our system, there's some winners and there's some losers, and not everybody can be a winner, but a lot of people can be losers, and we like it just fine. But it's not enough that there's just winners and losers. But the winners should and do have the God-given constitutional right to kick the losers every time they can. Otherwise, why just be a winner? Jeez, you're just winning. You got to rub people's noses in it, too. So, as they marched 2 by 2 from the Capitol lawn into the rotunda, the demonstrators held signs reading, "Voter suppression equals the true hacking of our democracy," and remained silent. Because, as Barber and Jackson noted, people in power want them to be silenced. And then they were arrested. I should note that I have the windows open here at Positively 3rd and Marie. It will be a bit warm again, and since I shouldn't run the fan because of its incessant humming drone that does get picked up over the microphone and create static. Oh yes. Having the windows open, so there may be the sounds of school buses, the laughter of children walking to school, and maybe the occasional dog bark. Yep. Oh, and I shouldn't forget also the glass packs on the Black Smoke Diesel in-your-face liberal, "I'm going to destroy the world and you can't do anything about it" trucks that are in the neighborhood. Because, I don't know, who cares about air quality or noise? Okay, out of Think Progress, Patrick Smith penned this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe, part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Will no one rid me of this meddlesome priest? NFL owners are engaged in discussions regarding how the league will respond to players who kneel and protest during the national anthem. And one of their reported solutions seems likely to only increase tensions between the league and players, because the owners are the owners and the players are the slaves. And you have the house slaves and you have the field slaves, and, you know, somebody's going to have to get punished, and they will. Also, we should note, and I had thought about including the story about Kaepernick earlier in the week, and it's only in the middle of the week, by the way, but it just didn't work out. But I will mention it now. In the discovery part of Eric Reed and Kaepernick's lawsuit against the NFL for collusion, conspiracy to keep them from having a job, it was discovered, indeed, the NFL had projected Kaepernick as a top-flight starting quarterback. But, you know, if he was just quiet and just didn't say anything about having a brain and let them just run him around, then everything would have been fine. But no, the guy had to express some sort of opinion. And let's remember what that opinion was. It was quiet, okay? Before he would just sit on the bench. Now, I got to tell you, I've seen lots of people. I played the game, And we never heard the national anthem when I was playing. We were in the locker room. Give me a break. Yeah, you know, this jingoistic BS. I mean, we love that stuff. Hitler got the idea of what he did in the 36 Olympics from us, from the LA Olympics in 32. Okay? Let's be clear about the raising of flags. That's when it was first done, was in the LA Olympics of 32. Before that, nation's flags weren't part of the Olympic Games. It was just athletes competing against athletes. They happened to come from all over the world. So this jingoistic practice of showing your patriotism, it's all just fluff. A true patriot doesn't need to expound on it and make it public. A patriot is a patriot. So, yeah, we didn't experience the national anthem when I was playing the game. We were in the locker room. And I think baseball was one of the only ones that had the national anthem anyway. Jeez. So the owners are, and other members of the league as well, this is their rules committee. They're thinking about, pass interference rules and motion in the backfield rules and all of that. Now they're going to come up with a penalty for kneeling. Because remember, it was a military man who told Kaepernick that it would be much more respectful to take a knee because you're going to say a prayer for the people who have died. And somehow the owners think that saying a prayer for the people who have died is un-American because a black man did it. So, the league wants to impose this rule. It's not passed yet. They're considering it. They don't know what to do. They're for the most part, a bunch of white guys and rich. And they like the plantation system that they have constructed just fine. The Bistro Cafe, part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, is an offering by Amanda Michelle Gomez out of Think Progress. Now, Michigan scrapped its Medicaid work exemption. Let's remind ourselves what that is. They had constructed it so that Medicaid recipients, to receive their benefits, their entitlement, what they paid into, by the way, they would have to work a set number of hours per week or have some sort of employment in some fashion to justify getting these benefits. Surprisingly, though, the way the law was written, 20 counties, rural counties, which are predominantly white, were exempted from the work requirements. Now, legislators have scrapped that idea, and they said that they're removing the provision to exempt Medicaid beneficiaries who live in counties with high unemployment, saying it's too difficult to administer. Instead, they're drafting a new bill that lowers the hours of work requirements and doesn't include a similar method of exemption. In other words, a bunch of white people up in these rural white counties, we'll tell them they have to work a couple of hours, and taking being the guy that passes the collection plate on Sundays, that's work right there. You can write that off. Greeter at Walmart, unpaid, fine. You can just show up and greet people. Write it off. You can do it now. but probably only in the white rural counties because they'll figure a way out. Now, even though Michigan has scrapped this legislation, this work requirement, the idea of exempting predominantly white rural or white counties from these work exemptions or work requirements is being floated or is actually a part of other states' structure. And so that's great. I guess we'll have to root them all out too. So the article does go into a list of all the other states that have work requirements or want to impose them. I would think that if, these work requirements also include peeing in a jar and all sorts of other things. So I think that if you want to be a cop, got to pee in a jar. Okay? Every time. And every time that there's an officer involved shooting or some sort of beating, they got to pee in a jar. And see what's in there. Okay? Turnabout is fair play, as they say. Well, let's get to our break, and we will come back and go through weather from around the world, and then we'll finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
It's Tuesday, May 22, 2018.
You said there are going to be massive sea level rises. Don't you think if you're going to have that kind of statement, you ought to have some idea as to what all the causes of sea level rises have been?
Republicans waste public's time denying sea level rise in House Science Committee hearing. NASA study finds humans are driving major changes in the global freshwater supply. The British government to launch non-recyclable plastic tax. Plus,
Swamp Captain Mitch McConnell has created millions of jobs for China people.
He's back. Ex-con coal baron Don Blankenship launches third-party bid for U.S. Senate.
All of those cons and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
Obama says when mine leaks into groundwater, it can cause intellectual impairment. But I drink mine water all the time, and I'm fine. And I drink mine water all the time, and I'm fine.
Go Don Blankenship. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, I listened to some of this audio from this House hearing. It is incredible the lengths that Republicans are going to deny climate change on behalf of the fossil fuel industry. It's amazing.
Yes, and Republicans on the House Science Committee. They were trying to explain away things like rising sea levels in a committee hearing last week in an attempt to deny the global scientific consensus that burning fossil fuels is causing dangerous global warming and rising sea levels. Republican Congressman Mo Brooks of Alabama was very sure that if sea levels really are rising, it could be because of rocks tumbling into the sea.
What about erosion? Every time you have that soil or rock or whatever it is that is deposited into the seas, that forces the sea levels to rise because now you've got less space in those oceans because the bottom is moving up.
Oh, Jesus.
Now, the purpose of that hearing was to focus on how technology could be deployed for adapting to climate change. But instead of examining potential policy actions, the leading climate scientist, Philip Duffy of the Woods Hole Research Center, had to spend the hearing instead explaining basic science to Republican House members.
Good God.
Meanwhile, former coal baron and ex-convict Don Blankenship, the so-called Dark Lord of Coal, who served a year in prison for mine safety violations that caused the deaths of 29 miners back in 2010, has now announced he is launching a third-party run for Senate in West Virginia after losing the Republican primary. Blankenship's bizarre primary campaign ads attacking Republican Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell garnered a lot of attention.
They blew up the coal mine and then put me in prison. Now they're running ads that say the coal mine blew up and I went to prison. There's no surprise there.
So now we may see more of those kooky Blankenship ads if Blankenship can find a way around West Virginia state law to proceed.
Yeah, if he's able to get on the ballot, it would not help the Republicans, that's for sure. It'll probably help Democratic incumbent Senator Joe Manchin, but it remains a big if. West Virginia has a sore loser law that'll probably keep Blankenship off the ballot.
Then again, Blankenship really hasn't cared that much for laws previously.
Well, that's true, but if he wants to run, he's going to have to follow them, sort of.
Meanwhile, NASA scientists tracking shifts in the global water supply via satellite measurements say that humans have dramatically altered the global water map, revealing major shifts in water supplies from California to China over the last 2 decades. They link about 2/3 of the changes in water availability to climate change and human activities, like excessive groundwater pumping in farming regions. Calling the data, quote, an eye-opener, they warn that the shifts in global water supply indicate potential areas for future water resource conflicts due to decreasing water availability, primarily in food-producing regions in the United States, in India, and the Middle East. But some good news, the British government is planning a major new tax on non-recyclable plastic packaging to fight the scourge of pervasive plastic pollution in the world's oceans.
Yeah, good news for you, tax and spend liberals.
Well, the UK Independent reports that the proposed new plastic tax would levy a tax on the use of non-recyclable plastic packaging, so it puts the burden of plastic waste onto the companies that create it. The UK plan is to make the cost of using non-recyclable plastics, quote, so exorbitantly high that companies will shift to recyclable packaging instead. And Britain plans to use the revenue from the tax to expand its recycling facilities and create new jobs.
Sounds kind of like what a lot of folks have been trying to do, putting a price on carbon.
Exactly. Meanwhile, the city of San Francisco has committed to transitioning to an all-electric bus fleet.
Nice.
Planning to launch a small electric bus pilot program next year with the target of shifting to all-electric buses starting 7 years from now in 2025. That sounds great and very progressive, unless you know that the city of Shenzhen, China, has already switched all 16,000 of its buses to electric, and they did it in just 3 years.
Well, that's because they made China great again. For much more on all of these reports and the ones we didn't have time for, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Find us, follow us, and share us worldwide on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
I don't want to toss no bus. Can I buy your magic bus?
Welcome to 60 Second Civics, the daily podcast of the Center for Civic Education. I'm Mark Gage. In 1798, the U.S. Congress took a page out of colonial history and passed the controversial Sedition Act that outlawed publication of false, scandalous, and malicious statements against the government or Congress. The Alien Acts, which passed in the same year, gave President John Adams, a Federalist, the power to force foreigners to leave the country if he considered them dangerous. These laws outraged Republicans, especially after Federalist judges fined and jailed several Republican newspaper editors and a member of Congress under the Sedition Act. The Alien and Sedition Acts helped mobilize Republicans for the presidential election of 1800. The Sedition Act expired in 1801, and the new president, Thomas Jefferson, pardoned those prosecuted. As a result of the American experience with the Sedition Act, a broader legal definition of freedom of the press prevailed. That's all for today's podcast. 60 Second Civics, where civic education only takes a minute.
Today, a quick quiz. Ready? Donald Trump pledged to totally destroy what law? I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. During his presidential campaign and continuing through his presidency, Donald Trump vowed to repeal, in his words, totally destroy, the Johnson Amendment. The Johnson Amendment is a 1954 law named after then-Senator Lyndon Johnson, which says that not-for-profit, tax-exempt organizations like churches cannot endorse or oppose or use their money to endorse or oppose political candidates. Church leaders, of course, have a First Amendment right to speak out on any topic, and churches themselves can give information, express beliefs and values, and oppose policies. But a concerted campaign for a specific candidate for a specific office, that's a bridge too far if you want to remain tax exempt. But that's not what the law should be, according to certain evangelical churches. So, in both 2017 and 18, as part of appropriation and tax bills, those representatives who wanted to join Trump's crusade tried to insert into tax and spending bills language that would have directly or indirectly ended the Johnson Amendment. Do note this. When the present omnibus spending bill ends on September 30th, their fight to scrap this law and tear down the wall of separation between church and state will begin anew, as will the resistance. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because freedom can't protect itself.
From UN headquarters in New York, I'm Luke Vargas with your World in 2 Minutes. Russia's parliament passed legislation Tuesday aimed at arming the country with the ability to counter-sanction the U.S. and other countries that have slapped a range of financial punishments on Russia over the annexation of Crimea, interference in the 2016 U.S. elections, or the attempted assassination of a former Russian spy in the UK earlier this year. Tuesday's new law chides those unfriendly nations and could eventually lead to new bans on U.S. imports as well as exports to the United States. But changes made to the bill before its passage suggest those counter-sanctions could have unintended consequences, given the asymmetric nature of U.S.-Russia trade. By and large, Russia sends raw materials to the U.S., but imports finished goods, technology, food, and medicine. Imports of American pharmaceuticals, which according to one account totaled $600 million last year, were originally singled out in an early draft of the sanctions bill, but eventually omitted due to concern that Russians, not American pharmaceutical companies, which rake in nearly $500 billion in revenue each year, would be hurt by that ban. It turns out promising sanctions is easier than actually imposing them. And North Korea is said to be hours away from destroying a foremost underground nuclear test site in a ceremony for foreign reporters. The Pyongyang test site played host to numerous nuclear tests in recent years until a massive blast there last fall damaged the mountainous complex and rendered it inoperable. This week's planned demolition isn't the first time North Korea has ceremoniously destroyed parts of its nuclear program. In 2008, the country dismantled a cooling tower at one facility in the presence of journalists, experts from the IAEA, and U.S. government officials. But having that diverse crowd on hand ultimately changed little. North Korea is believed to have restarted enrichment at that nuclear facility just a year after the demolition. Luke Vargas, The United Nations.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Smothered Benedict Wednesdays, yes. And I just happen to have made you a French 77, which is just like the French 75, as popularized in popular lore from the movie Casablanca. The only difference is that instead of simple syrup, put in the elderberry flower liqueur. St. Augustine is the brand of choice. Yes, just do it. And it is not just my opinion, but the opinion of many. Many people say the most balanced cocktail in the history of cocktails. Try it. You'll see. Okay, let's begin with weather from around the world. And we always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River and the Rogue River Valley of southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 60 degrees already. Though we aren't going to be nearly as warm as we were yesterday. We were bumping about 98 yesterday, which in some circles you would say that's almost 100. But we're only slated to go to a high of about, 81, 82, 83. warm enough. Thunderstorms are in the area, won't be reaching us until probably early to mid-afternoon, in which we will be getting about a 1/4 inch from that time. And then we're going to get another 1/4 inch tomorrow. And then something less than a 1/4 of an inch. I'm sorry. Yeah, a 1/4 of an inch tomorrow. And then something less of a 1/4 of an inch on Friday. Which means my garden will be fine. And I will hold off on watering other specimens that probably can go until we have a good rain. Yes, we do. Winds are negligible out of the west-southwest at about 2 miles per hour. Will be picking up later. They will be still light and variable through the day, including when our thunderstorms roll through. They will pick up tomorrow, though, out of the west-northwest and at 5 to 10 miles per hour. So they will be out of the west-southwest today, light and variable, meaning something around 3 miles per hour, maybe. Okay, so yeah, they've updated my thunderstorm advisory, so that should be happening, I don't know, in about 4 hours, 3 hours. Grass pollen allergens remain high for those who are susceptible to it. Air quality index is at the high end of good at 24 parts per million. The daytime UV index is at 7, considered high, though not as high as it's been. It's not in the red. And pressure is holding at 29.72 inches, visibility up to 10 miles, and humidity, that's general humidity, is at 79%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these personal purchased weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people live around the world. London is 65 and partly cloudy. Paris is 70 and mostly cloudy. They continue with a wind and rain advisory, in which important infrastructure like the electrical grid could be impacted. Rome is at 70, mostly cloudy, and they've lifted their advisory for the same. Kiev is 81 and fair. Kabul is 65 and fair. Don't have a wedding. Not today. It's bad wedding weather. Hong Kong is 81 and clear. Tokyo is 63 degrees with heavy rain showers. Sydney, Australia is 57 and clear. San Francisco, California is 52 and cloudy, and they continue to have a small craft advisory for winds, steady winds from 20 to 30 miles per hour with gusts up to 60 miles per hour. Wow, gale force, even more. And New York is 70 degrees Fahrenheit and cloudy. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these personal purchased weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people live around the world. Offering here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays, is by Alternate. A nameless worker bee at Alternate penned this. So, but it does cite a much larger article out of Vanity Fair. And it is that Trump staffers are quite alarmed, and they're in a tizzy because they're afraid that there may be multiple FBI informants planted within their midst to bring down Trump. Well, yeah, he's a crook and a mobster and a traitor. Excuse me, but you guys can be accomplices. Maybe you could try the Stockholm Syndrome defense. That might work. It could. Now, these conspiracy theories have nothing that are coming out of the White House, have nothing to do with the actual conspiracies uncovered by the U.S. intelligence communities and others of the Russian effort to undermine American democracy. Instead, reporter Gabriel Sherman at Vanity Fair explains. The theory goes that the FBI later used these contacts with the Russians to delegitimize his presidency. Trump, is the FBI in collusion with the Russians to hurt Trump? Isn't that rich? Trump's advisors say the intelligence community believed Hillary Clinton would win the presidency, but in case she didn't, they concocted this elaborate plot to remove Trump from office. Remember when Trump went around and said Obama wasn't born here? He had like operatives back in the day that he was born to plant this news story in this particular newspaper, but he was never born there. He was born in Kenya, Indonesia. And John Brennan, I should mention also, in the White House feverish dreams, he is the figure in almost all of their conspiracies that they have. So Roger Stone hates Brennan, of course. Referred to Brennan as the psychopath, and that guy is going down. The psychopath is going down. This peek inside Trump world explains many otherwise perplexing phenomena, including the right-wing media efforts to ignore the substantial justification and progress made by Special Counsel Mueller's team, as long as they're convinced that the whole FBI investigation is a plot to take down Trump. Any developments from the Special Counsel's investigation will just look like more confirmation of the conspiracy. I have to say, this is not news. This is exactly what Putin did. It's been recorded. It's been deconstructed. It's been analyzed, and we were warned. This is exactly what Trump would do.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer. Mes automnes, quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Finishing up here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is an article by Ryan Goodman out of Just Security. Ryan Goodman happens to be the co-editor-in-chief of Just Security, and also just happens to be the former special counsel to the general counsel of the Department of Defense from 2015 to 2016. Special counsel Robert Mueller may have concluded that he cannot indict a sitting president, but that all could change if federal judges are given a chance to say what they think about the matter. A critical misstep by Trump's lawyers could give the courts the opportunity to do just that. What is that misstep? Litigating the question whether Mueller has the power to subpoena the president to testify before a grand jury. As things currently stand, Mueller's hands may be bureaucratically tied. Justice Department memos going back and forth to before Nixon say that you cannot indict a sitting president, said Trump's lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, last week, adding that the special counsel's office acknowledged to us orally that they understand that they can't violate the Justice Department rules. Regardless of whether Giuliani is to be believed about what Mueller's team said, his description of the Justice Department's Office of Legal Counsel, the OLC, opinions is accurate. And these were written during the Nixon administration and the other during the Clinton era. So Rudy's right about that part. Simply put, these opinions conclude that a president is categorically immune from indictment while in office. What's more, Many legal experts, though not all, also think that Mueller is effectively bound by those opinions. But the status of the opinions inside the Justice Department may not hold. It depends on how the fight over a subpoena plays out. A problem for the president's lawyers is that Mueller reportedly believes he has the powers to subpoena the president to testify. There's an untold threat to Trump's presidency if his lawyers fight Mueller on that issue and lose in court. The end result could not only culminate in federal judges upholding the power of the special counsel to subpoena the president. It could also throw open the door to the idea that a sitting president is also subject to indictment and prosecutions. That's because of two constitutional issues: a president's immunity from indictment and a president's immunity from a subpoena are intertwined. Former Obama White House counsel Bob Bauer wrote earlier this month that if Trump's team fights the subpoena through litigation, they are likely to do so on the same grounds set forth in the Nixon and Clinton OLC opinions, namely, the subjecting of the president to the criminal process would interfere with his ability to perform the duties of his office. Well, in this case, it's just playing golf and tweeting. I think he has time. One lead looked no further than Giuliani's own arguments, which contest Mueller's ability to subpoena a sitting president based on the principles announced in the Nixon and Clinton memos. These connections are also to be found in the OLC's own reasoning. A third OLC opinion, written during the Reagan administration, addressed whether a sitting president can be subpoenaed to testify in a criminal case. The author of that memo, Ambassador Douglas Kimiak, recently wrote about the logic of these opinions. The evaluation of presidential subpoenas is also inseparable from the issue of whether a sitting president is subject to indictment, he explained. The OLC first concludes that a sitting president is immune from criminal prosecution and reasons from that anything in support of that prosecution, including subpoenas for information, are not consistent with the separation of powers and the nature of the impeachment process. If that's correct, it may force a court to address the antecedent question, whether a sitting president is immune from criminal prosecution, in the course of addressing whether the president is subject to a subpoena in a criminal investigation. One caveat here is that Mueller would argue in the litigation. He would presumably contend, at least in the alternative, that the president's amenability to indictment, especially indictment during his term, is irrelevant to whether Trump can be subpoenaed to provide evidence about a grand jury investigation. Now, what might happen if Trump's lawyers fight a subpoena in court? Most legal experts think that the odds are strongly in Mueller's favor that the federal courts, on up to the Supreme Court, would validate the subpoena. Now, the Nixon and Clinton memos are especially vulnerable because their reasoning is widely understood as weak and unsupportable. The opinions themselves also admitted to the lack of judicial decisions in direct support of their conclusions. That's yet another reason the subsequent contrary statements from the bench is one thing that could break the memo's bureaucratic hold on Mueller. Their status could become uncertain, even superseded by contrary judicial authority. In the final analysis, Mueller has a strong hand in the constitutional battle over whether he could successfully subpoena the president to testify. If both sides understand the risks involved, Mueller would know he has the power to force the issue, and Trump's lawyers would stand down. If Trump's team doesn't, they may cost their client much more than just having to answer the special counsel's questions. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day. But Netroots Radio broadcasts on with breaking news throughout the day, of course. And we'll visit with you tomorrow for Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays, because that's what we do. It'll be Thursday. And there'll all, of course, be such breaking news we'll be overwhelmed again, as it is meant to be. So continue listening to Netroots Radio throughout the day, and we will visit with you tomorrow here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte coère. Je voudrais toujours te plaire, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum, 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 dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum, 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 dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver, dans mon jardin d'hiver.